Welcome to our latest instalment of our DK Engineering Users Guides. And today something slightly different, our first race car, the Mercedes-Benz AMG GT3. This is a car that I have personally raced over the last 2 seasons with Seas Motorsport in the British GT Championship. But first of all, a little bit of background behind the term GT3. In 2005, Stefan Rattel, the head of the SRO group and promoter of the FIA GT Championship, presented the concept utilising balance of performance to allow Cup Series cars such as Ferrari Challenge and Porsche Super Cup to compete against one another as a lower cost alternative to the now out of control GT1 class. In 2006, these regulations were put to the test by 8 manufacturers, including Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, Corvette, Dodge, Aston Martin and more. The class was a huge success, and in the present day, over 55 models have now been homologated for use in the GT3 class, which now compete in the largest series in the world, and from next year will include the WEC series, as well as IMSA, VLN and more. In 2011, the Mercedes SLS underwent the homologation process to become the 28th model sanctioned for racing in the GT3 class. A powerhouse car, the M159 6.2 litre V8, had a bonnet almost as long as some cars in the class, and of course still featured gull-wing doors. The SLS emblazoned an image in the minds of spectators for years to come and had great success. In March 2016, Mercedes' new sports car, the AMG GT, became the 42nd model to be homologated for GT3. Unlike the road car, which abandoned the thunderous type M159 naturally aspirated V8 to make way for a smaller turbocharged M178, the GT3 variant continued with the race-proven naturally aspirated engine, which is a great surprise to many. Unlike many other road-faring sports cars, the AMG GT was built with GT3 homologation already in mind, and featured packaging and layout similar to a conventional GT3 race car with transaxle, double wishbones and a dry sump. In 2020, the AMG GT3 Evo was announced, which was provided in a way of an upgrade package rather than being homologated as an entirely new model, unlike the Lamborghini Evo 2. Still featuring the 6.2 litre V8, the Evo package brought with it a Black Series-inspired bumper and aerodynamic tweaks to aid cooling and performance. So this AMG GT3 is an evolution example, which is in exactly the way, shape and form that it finished the last round of the 2023 British GT Championship at Donington just a few weeks ago. So what we'll do is we'll work from front to back of the car, and first of all, under the bonnet. So to open the bonnet, it's got these 2 quick release openings at the front, where we press down there, push it back, same on the other side, and open the bonnet, much like a road car. So under the bonnet here, first of all, you will see so much carbon fibre. Everything on the car where it can be has been adapted to be carbon fibre. In fact, these cars only share 20% of the parts with their road car counterpart, which kind of belittles the GT3 premise that all the GT3 road cars are loosely variants of the track car, when really they aren't. Of course, the basis of this, the chassis, the tub, it is the same as the road car, but like I said, 20% of the parts are carried over. So we see all of this carbon fibre, and just whilst we're looking at the bonnet, you can see these air ducts which feed from the front here, coming through the front grille, up through here, down, in through these ducts and feed into the cockpit. Because during a race, especially if you've had a pit stop where you get loads of heat soak, lots of heat build-up, it's really important to keep your driver cool, because the cooler the driver is, the more efficient he is and the quicker he's going to be for longer. So back down into the engine bay then. So we've got this naturally aspirated V8 here. It's a 6.2 litre, the M159, and it's a common misconception that because of the shape of this car, that these cars are a hot V twin turbo like the road cars, but no, it's not. It's the engine from the SLS they transferred across to this AMG GT3. So it sits right back. If you see here, the front of the engine is behind the centerline of the front axle, making it almost a mid-engined but front-engine car. In front of it, we've got these long Plenum tubes, which are for the inlet manifold, and between them and the air filter at the front here, again, all carbon fibre, we've got these restrictors, and we'll come back to those in a minute, but that's all to do with the BOP, which is the balance of performance, which was Stefan Rattel's idea behind GT3, trying to get all of the cars on a level playing field. And as we go through the season or a series, we'll find that different elements of the BOP are changed if a car has become a bit too competitive to try and level things back down again. And most of the time that works really, really well for all of the championships. Moving back over into this corner then, we've got the 2 brake fluid reservoirs here for front and rear circuits, and also a clutch fluid reservoir, which many people don't realise, because this is a paddle shift car, it still has a clutch so that we can get away at the pit stops, and it is also possible to stall the car, which is why often you'll see people giving it lots of revs, dropping the clutch to make sure that they don't do that. At the front here, we've got the power steering pump, And then just in the middle, behind the radiator system, we've got the dry sump oil tank, which is where all the oil goes instead of being in the sump of the engine, so that the engine can be dropped right down in the chassis. All of the oil is here in this remote tank. We also see the radiators here fully leaning forwards like a true race car to try and get the weight right down and also give us much more surface area for the air to run through as it comes out and through the duct in the bonnet and up and over the car and away. On the other side there, we see the water reservoir for the radiator system. We've even got a washer fluid bottle for the windscreen, which generally the guys tend to run empty as it saves weight. And then finally, we've got the Bosch ABS system here, the control system, because these cars run ABS with variable levels, which again we'll come back to. So at the front of the air inlet system, right at the very front of the car, we've got a pressure and a temperature sensor here. And as you pass through the restrictors and back to the engine, there's another temperature sensor here on the back side of the restrictor, and then a pressure sensor inside the inlet plenum, which measures that. So we've got a before and after, and that helps with the data that's logged for the scrutineers to check that the restrictors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Added to that, on each side of the car, this car has exhausts that feed out the side of the engine, down the side of the sills and out the side of the car. And in that exhaust system, you have 2 lambda sensors per side, one for the engine management system of the car itself, and one for that data logging system for the organisers for scrutineering to measure that BOP. Other minor areas that it may affect on this car is minimum ride height, so the higher the car, the slower it is because it has less aerodynamics working, and also camber in terms of how much angle can be in the tyres front and rear, and the idea being the less camber, the less performance you get from the car. And these things will be tweaked during a championship or a series or a season by giving people more weight, less weight, so they have advantages or to have an advantage taken away, so that we continue this sort of balancing of the cars. And very often the guys do a great job that are running all the championships. Sometimes they get it wrong, and very often drivers always complain that they've got a bad BOP on their car. But we'll move over to the interior of this car and we'll go on the passenger side so we can focus a bit more on the data logging side of things initially. So as we look inside the passenger side here, and I'll just make a point on that, obviously me being a 50s Ferrari guy, all the early racing Ferraris are right-hand drive because racing circuits are clockwise, but today most racing cars are left-hand drive and 99% of GT3 cars are all left-hand drive. So as I look inside the passenger side here, first of all I'm struck by the size of the roll cage. It's so intricate, and that's part of modern racing, is that it is so safe today. We've got this huge multi-point cage that runs all to all 4 corners, front and back, across the top, and it's a real chunky, sturdy thing, so you feel like you're definitely going to be safe in here in the worst case scenario of a big accident. But looking on the passenger side here, working from the front to back, we've got the data logger system here at the front, which is for the eligibility side of things, or the scrutineers, so that they can monitor all of those systems that we've talked about in terms of the air temperature and pressure systems at the front. We move back slightly and we've got the ECUs for the car itself. We've got the live data feed. So this is the ECU that controls the live data that's fed back to the pits. And when you see the images in the pits of the big TV screens with all the data, all of that live data is fed back from the car through the aerial back to the pit garage, so that as the guys are going along, they can see what's happening. And even I've been told in the past that I've got a puncture before I even know I've got a puncture. It's quite amazing when you're in the car to hear all of that sort of thing going on. Moving back, we've got this big weight box here. So when weight's added, so to slow the car down, when the car's given BOP, the point where it needs to have more weight added, that's where it's added in here. We've got the V-Box, which is part of the video system, so that post-race or post-qualifying or post-test session, that the pros and the AM can sit down and look through the data and see where people are braking, turning in, how much speed they're carrying, which is super useful for bringing on a driver and making them go faster, because they can actually look point to point at what they're doing and they can overlay their data against other drivers. So it's a really useful way of improving on a driver's performance. We've got the fire bottle system, so that's where the fire extinguisher is, and it feeds out to all the different points in the car, in the engine bay, in the interior. So in the event of a fire, someone presses that red button, and that's where all the fire extinguisher gas comes from. And then moving back, we've just got all the rest of the electrics. We can see the fuel tank certificate in the back here. Of course, this has got a bag fuel cell system or a bag tank, so that if there's an accident, it can deform and it doesn't get ruptured. And there we've got the label, so you can see when the fuel tank expires, because normally they have a 5-year life. And then finally, we've got this data logging system point here, which is when the cars come into the garage, you always see the AMG guys coming in, getting their laptop and plugging in, because whilst the data is fed back live to the pits, it's not recorded, it's recorded in the car, and there's actually much more detail on the recorded information. So the laptop's plugged in, it's downloaded to the laptop, and they can look at it and see if there are any issues about to rear their head or tune and perfect things. So that's our passenger side of the car. The final thing, on this passenger side is this oil level sensor. So this is more for endurance racing when the cars are coming in for their regular pit stops. So you'll come in once an hour for tyres and fuel and what have you. The technicians will look at this to see what the oil level is and see if they need to put some in, because at the technical stops, which are the longer stops during a 24-hour race, that's when they'll put oil in, but this just helps them keep an eye on it. So now it's time to focus on the driver's side, which of course, as I said, is left-hand drive on this car. Naturally, if I was about to get into the car, I would have all of my race kit on, including my helmet. Now I've got my helmet because I want to show you something on that in a second, but first of all, let's talk about pit stops and driver change. So had we have just done a stint in the race, the previous driver would have got out the car, and in British GT, we have to get out the car, close the door, and then allow them to do the fuel stop. So the fueling rig would have gone onto the car, fueled the car up, and then as it comes off, we're allowed to get back to the car and get into it. So the first things first is my molded seat. This has been shaped exactly to my body because we're going through quite a lot of G-force on every lap of the race, that if you're rattling around in the seat, it gives you a really sore back, really sore bum, and you want to avoid that because, again, you want the driver to be as comfortable as possible. So this has been molded and shaped to my size. So we throw this into the driver's seat, and it's made to measure for a Mercedes, so it wouldn't work in any other car seat, and that goes in there. Then if the driver's getting in, and think of me as the driver that's just got out, I'm going to help my co-driver get in. So I will lean in, and I will help him with his belts. So first his lap. I'll be grabbing the shoulder belt, making sure that I get it over his hands device, putting that in there, and he'll be grabbing the belts from the other side and looking after himself. From that point forwards, I've got the net that I have to clip into here, and then finally I'll grab from his helmet, which we'll use mine to demonstrate. I'll grab from his helmet this thing, which people are always like, what on earth is this cord on the side of your thing? Well, you've got two uses here. One is the radio, so this is how you connect to the radio, so you can talk to the pits, and the pits can talk back to you. And secondly, this is for the driver's drink. Again, I've talked about it already. It can get very hot in the car, so people quite often like to have a drink. The professionals generally tend to try and run without one because they want to look good, but the amateurs definitely like to have a drink. And that plugs in here on the sill. So you plug that in, you've got your driver ready to go, and then you close the door and off they go. In the longer distance races, we've talked about water or drinks already. This is a drinks bottle, and if it's a 24-hour race, for example, each driver might bring a fresh drinks bottle. So they simply pull it out of the door here and push it back in, and this is connected to the system where there's a button on the steering wheel, so the water will then come out of here and into your helmet so you can drink through the straw that's in your helmet. But next, I'm going to get into the car. So it is quite tight. I always struggle to get in. I don't know how some of the bigger guys do it, but you've just got to pour yourself in almost. So once you're in, we've talked about the belts. So this would have been done up by my co-driver, but you're able to tighten and loosen everything yourself in the car. Once you've got your shoulder belts, I mentioned as well, you've got your hands device, which goes with your helmet. You want to make sure that your shoulder straps are over your hands device to hold it in, and everything gets pulled in, and you can tighten everything else up yourself. Specifically for these races where you've got two drivers, you'll find there are lots of little magnets and things around the car. So for example, when I come into the pits, as I'm coming down the pit lane, when I pull to a stop and I've undone my belts, I try and loosen them off as I come to a standstill so that the next driver, it's easier to put them on, they can tighten them up. But also, where we put this shoulder belt, there's a magnet on the back of the roll cage so that it can sit there. So when the next driver gets in, he knows exactly where his belt is. He can pull it off the magnet, put it straight in without trying to scrapple with things, because you can imagine with your helmet on, you can't really see too much when you're in here. In the Mercedes, we have this carbon fibre safety cell, so the seat is absolutely fixed where it is. So we talked about your moulded insert, which gets you nice and comfortable, but there's no movement of the seat. You move the steering wheel and the pedals. So first of all, if we look at the pedals, I've got this lever on my right-hand side, and if I push that forwards, I can push the pedal block backwards and forwards to where I want it to go. And I've actually got a mark on the roll cage here to show me from my helmet where I like to be. So I get it to that point, I let go, I give it a little kick, and I make sure that it's in position. And therefore my pedals are where I want them to be. In terms of steering wheel, you've got a removable lock on the steering column, much like a road car, and you can go up and down, out and in. I tend to like it fully down and fully in. like that, so I know exactly where I am. So now I'm ready to go. My belts are done up tight, my pedals are in the right position, my steering wheel's in the right position. It's time to go through the controls. So now we can look at the controls inside the car, and first things first, let's look at the steering wheel. So on the steering wheel, I've got a number of buttons each side, approximately 4 a side. Top left here, I've got radio, so if I press and hold this, I can talk to the pits. It's only one-way radio at a time, so I might be sitting there going around on my lap. The team talk to me and I can hear it through my headphones. And if I want to say something back, I have to press the button. I'll hear a beep and then I can speak. And as long as I want to speak, I have to keep holding the button, and it works like that. The next button is drink. So as we discussed earlier, the drink comes through a pipe from this bottle in the door up into my helmet, and I've got a pipe in front of my mouth. So I can press that and it'll squirt fluid into my mouth. Sometimes some drivers like to have that pipe in their mouth the whole time, or sometimes they keep it to one side, so they've got to manoeuvre it into the right position. But it's a super useful thing, especially if you've got a really hot race and you're in a safety car position where you're going much slower, so the airflow is much slower. It gets so much hotter in here, so it's really nice to just have that to just kind of bring you back down and cool you down and make you feel a bit more hydrated, because especially as we've seen in Formula 1 recently, people talk about hydration in race cars a lot. Moving down, we have the neutral button. So if you press and hold neutral, then it will click into neutral. You've got the chrono button. On the right hand side, we've got flash. So quite often, if you're coming up behind a slower car, you might flash, or if you're trying to overtake someone, you might try and distract them by pressing that, and it'll cause the headlights to flash 3 times. Then in this shielded button here, which is the red button, this is your pit speed. So in first gear, that will set you down to 50 or 60 kilometers an hour, depending on the circuit. So as you're coming into the pits, you hit the brakes, you come down the gearbox, and you press that button, and then when you go full throttle, it won't let you go higher than that maximum speed. And also, if you're already going above, it will cut the ignition until you go below that speed. For some circuits or some race championships as well, you may have in third gear an 80 kilometer an hour maximum speed or similar, whereby if you have a full course yellow and they ask you all cars to go at 80 kilometers an hour in third gear, you then press that and it holds you at 80k. The final 2 main buttons on here are DDU page minus and plus. When we turn the ignition on in a second, you'll see there are many pages in front of you here, and that's to scroll through the different pages, so you can see different things on different pages. Then finally, you've got your start-stop button. So you put your foot on the clutch and the brake, and you press the start-stop button, it'll start the engine. Of course, on the back of the steering wheel, you've also got your up the gears and down the gears. So it's obviously an F1 paddle shift type system. So up the gears on the right, down on the left, just like that. We've also got this very traditional Mercedes indicator stalk here, which is down for right and up for left, which sometimes if you're moving over for someone because you're coming into the pits, or you've got a faster car coming up behind you, you want to let them know where you're going, you can do that. Sometimes people will actually say thank you to people with a left and a right when someone's moved over for them. You've got the sort of press it in for the windscreen wash wiper, which, as I said, doesn't always have any fluid in there, but that might give you 1 cycle on those. And as well, you've got your different speeds for the windscreen wipers if you want to turn them on slow, medium or full speed. So very much like a road car, that. So generally as a driver, I'll run on this page, which is page 1. So at the top here we've got our revs. I've got some shift lights above this as well. It's got my speed here, so particularly useful for when you're coming into the pits, so you can know how far down to slow to before you hit the pit lane speed limiter. This will be my delta, so it'll tell me the fastest lap in the dash of that weekend at the circuit if it hasn't been reset, whether how slow or how much faster I am predicted on that lap. Number of laps I've done, the water temperature. We've got which gear you're in, so this will go from neutral to first. ABS setting I'm in, so 11 here, and then traction control 10, then engine map 3. A fuel reading here, we've got the time at the bottom here, and then finally these 8 readings here are to do with tyre pressure and tyre temperature. So in bar, we've got the front left, front right, rear left, rear right, in terms of bar, so 1.4, 1.43 for the front left and the front right. And then these ones here are the temperatures of each tyre, so front left, front right, back left, back right. They're not reading accurately at the moment, but those give you your tyre temperatures, because if you're behind a safety car or if it's the green flag lap, you're really trying to maintain that temperature and keep those temperatures up high. Typically 80 or 90 degrees is where we want those temperatures to be, and sometimes when you're behind the safety car you can see them drop right down to 50 or 60, and the lower the temperature the less grip, so you're really trying to work those tyres behind the safety car. Again, in Formula 1 you might see people weaving behind the safety car trying to get that temperature back. And that's what they're doing, is they're trying to keep that temperature up, because the higher the temperature, the better the performance, the more grip. So in the centre console here we've got the first and most important button at the start of getting in the car is the main power switch. So we press this to turn it on, and then we've got the ignition switch, which, much like a fighter jet, you pull it back, and that turns everything on, turns the dash on, gets the car primed and ready to go. All the other buttons we don't really interact with too much once they're set in the pit lane ready for us to go. The only two that we might play with are ABS and traction control. Of course, these GT3 cars all have ABS and traction control. That's going to be the biggest difference next year when WEC becomes GT3, having been GTE, is the introduction of these cars that have ABS and traction. So looking at these, we've got these two knobs that go from 1 up to 11 on each. Now, in a Mercedes, it's kind of the opposite to other cars, where less is more. Therefore, if you're on a new tyre run, we tend to run a 10-10 situation, which is 10 on ABS and 10 on TC, which is minimum basically. 11 on each of those are special settings for the Nürburgring. So 10-10 is minimum ABS, minimum TC. If it was the start of a wet race, we might go as low as 8 or 7 in each. So in ABS and traction control, we go down to 7 in each, so that we've got more traction control intervention, more ABS to slow down the car. Sometimes you might encounter an ABS fault during the run where you see ABS failure on the dash, and the first thing you'll do is press this ABS reset button. Might be in the wet where there's some water got into some sensors or something like that, just to reset it. There's also the opportunity to turn traction control and ABS totally off, which you'd only ever really do again if you had some sort of intermittent issue and you wanted to have a level playing field to work from. Also in the middle here, we've got the reverse button. So if you find yourself in a situation where you've had a spin, you're facing the barrier and you need to reverse out, you're on the brakes, you get the car into neutral, and then you press and hold reverse, and it'll put you into reverse, and you can reverse out of the situation. Something I had to do at Brands Hatch during qualifying, when I was already on pole and had a little bit of a spin going on to the Grand Prix circuit. I had to suddenly find reverse, and because I never select reverse, it took me a little while to find it, but once I was there, I got it reversed out of the situation, into first gear, and off I went, not a problem. We've also got the option of a spare fuel pump here, so we've got fuel pump 1, which is on at the moment, and we could switch over to fuel pump 2 with these two middle switches. Then finally at the top here we've got this binnacle of switches where we've got fuel reset. So sometimes the team, after we've done a pit stop, they will ask us to fuel reset so they can measure how much fuel has been used based on what's gone on and work their calculations from there. You've got your ECU map button here, which is just always on the same. SRO these days make us run on just one map setting, so we can't have an alternative map for fuel saving or anything like that. DDU brightness, so up and down for the console in front of me here, going brighter and dimmer. If you're doing a night race, you might want to have that right down so it's not glaring you in the face. Hazard lights for the obvious. And then we've got lights 1 and 2. So 1 is headlights on, and if you press 2, it would also turn on the auxiliary lights, which this car doesn't feature because it's not in the endurance spec at the moment. But again, for an endurance race, you'd have the additional lower spotlights to light up the apexes in a night race. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got the rain light, which is a flashing red light, which when you turn it on, you'll be told that you have to if it's wet enough that you've got to have that on. And that's for the safety of other drivers in the spray being able to see you if they're coming up over a hill, to see there's a car coming ahead. We've got a little fan, it says AC, but there's no AC in this car. So the fan is just literally a blower in the front here to help with cooling, which it actually doesn't really do very much at all. And the final thing in the cockpit is this here on the right-hand side of your right-hand knee is the brake bias control, so you can wind more brake to the rear or more brake to the front, which some of the drivers will adjust during the race. Probably more a pro than an am will be playing with that, although I might get asked to change that. But we tend to work to sort of a level that we're happy with, that we've tested with. So in terms of the interior of the car, that's everything. The only things that we haven't touched on are things that we never really use as a driver, but it's a very easy place to be. It's a safe place to be. You always feel like everything's within reach, and knowing the controls and how everything works is really important, because again, when you're hot, when you're tired, when you're flustered, you want to be able to do things by muscle memory. You don't want to have to be looking for which is the radio button, which is the flash button, which is the start stop, where's the reverse button. You need to know all these things, and having your eyes on that dash and making use of that page, it's really difficult to find time to look at it, but as you get more comfortable, more confident, you've done more laps in the car, you'll be able to look at that page and take in the information a lot better. And especially, as I said, if you're behind the safety car and trying to maintain your tyre pressure, your tyre temperature, it becomes so important the more experienced you become. Before we go into running up the car and how we start it, which is always part of our user's guides, and is especially more complicated than this car because it's a race car, there are a couple of other areas I want to cover on the outside of the car. First of all, at the front here, this is the lance. This car is currently set up for Donington spec, whereby the car comes down the pit lane and the garages are on its left-hand side. So the air lance is here, which is where you'll plug in to pull the air jacks up in the air and get the car raised up. And here's your fuel filler. So the fuel man will come on and he'll bolt on and fill the car up with fuel. Now for different circuits where the garages are on the right-hand side of the car, these two items get transferred over to the other side ready for that race meeting. So it's completely adjustable on this car. At the front of the car, we've got this huge front splitter with these dive planes, and effectively the whole car has a flat floor. It's very aerodynamic driven. The Mercedes is famous for having lots of downforce and being really good in the high-speed corners. It's got big Venturi ducts at the back, which you can see. And the one weak point that we have to touch on with the Mercedes, because every car has a weak point, is the engine is super low in the chassis. And that means if you straddle a curb over the center of the car, so the two wheels are either side of the curb and the curb goes under the car, you risk hitting the bottom of the engine and cracking it and destroying it. And that will be an engine change, which, believe me, is a 12-hour operation and can ruin your day or even your weekend. So that's something you've got to be really careful to avoid, and so many people have been caught out by. Now, quickly moving to the back of the car, we talked earlier on about how this has a transaxle, which means that the gearbox and the axle are one unit. It helps give the car much better weight distribution because it means that the weight can be put to the back because you've got the majority of the weight in the front for the engine, so it almost balances it out. We've got two air intakes on the rear here, so on the far side, we've got the cooling for the pump for the gearbox, and then this is the cooling for the gearbox itself. We've got the boot lid off the car at the moment, and if we look in here, we've got this carbon fibre, again, ducting that comes from that rear vent that cools the gearbox itself. And then just here in the corner, we've got the air compressor to run the gearbox shift system, because this is a pneumatically operated sequential shift system whereby we use air to change gear. Now, on a road car, that wouldn't work because it's absolutely instantaneous, hard and fast. But for a race car, when you're always pedal to the metal, that's what you want. And next to it here, we've got the shift block, which is what controls all of that system, which changes the gear for you. So you pull the paddle, the air system fires some air into the gearbox, and that's what changes it through that block system. So that's where we are. And just looking at the back here whilst we're here, you can see these Venturi ducts we talked about. So we've got a flat bottom of the car, and the area increases as it gets to the back, which helps accelerate the air and creates downforce. And as we said earlier on, the lower the car, the more downforce you'll have. You've also got this huge rear wing, which is the same. We're not allowed to wrap this in any livery or anything. We can have stickers on it, but we can't wrap it because it seems to be an aerodynamic advantage. And so talking about downforce, this car at about 150 miles an hour will have something like 1,000 kilograms of downforce, sticking it down to the track. Coupled with the slick tyres, that's how we managed to go through the Craner curves flat. Even Eau Rouge at Spa, that will be flat on your very best laps. Perhaps not every lap during a race, but certainly on a qualifying lap, you should be flat through Eau Rouge, which takes quite a lot of guts and working towards to do for the first time, but once you've done it a few times, it is fairly easy. Same for Blanchimont 2. Blanchimont 2 at Spa will be flat. Now, facts and figures, 0 to 60 is not particularly impressive on this car. It's probably something like 4.5 seconds. But it's the way in which it delivers the package in terms of its speed around the track, and a lot of that is related to the downforce. Also, with its power-to-weight ratio, this car, when it's got me in it, when it's got fuel in it, it's nearly 1.5 tons. So power-to-weight ratio, it's something like 400 brake horsepower per ton less than a McLaren Senna, but it delivers a lap time around Silverstone that is 10 seconds a lap faster than a McLaren Senna. So that gives you some sort of idea of the performance that we get out of this package. The GT3 car is relatively heavy. It hasn't got huge power, but it has got downforce. And the way it pulls together all of its attributes to deliver a lap time means that it is an insanely quick car round the track. So now let's move on to the startup sequence. It's a long sequence, and we're going to pull you through it, and then we're going to do a lap of a circuit.
Which raises the car in a couple of seconds. We would remove the wheels with a battery gun. And for the run-up process, we'll fit a run-up hub. All right, and then for ease of access, we can remove the door. It's a simple electrical connector, and it simply lifts off. Right, and then the firing up procedure. We have the main switch, then we turn the ignition on. We then cycle through to the mechanics page. And then before we fire up, we make sure we've got our fuel pump on, and we turn the ABS off so that when the rear wheels are spinning and the front aren't, it doesn't have an error or a system issue. and then simply press the start button and it will fire up. And now we are simply waiting for water and oil temps to rise before we then run through the gearbox. Once we're at 30 degrees, we then go through the gearbox, select first gear, release the clutch, and then we can increase our RPM to 3,500.